Guys, we have been wanting to make a solo build for you this season because there's never been a better season than this season for a solo player. You literally have mods that benefit you for playing solo. Now this build has it all: ad clear, high damage output, and survivability. And I think it suffices to say that this build is nuts. Not only in ritual playlists, but also in master difficulty content, and will probably be just as disgusting in grandmaster content. Now we even took this build into master lost sectors, 5 deltas below, and we're massacring overload champions with ease. So without further ado, let's get into the build. First up, there's a lot to be taken in today, guys, so buckle up. We're gonna jump into abilities as well as subclasses. And the subclasses you're gonna wanna be rocking is the Night Stalker subclass. For our supers, we chose Deadfall, which will fire void anchors that will weaken and suppress enemies who are caught in its radius. For our class ability, we chose Gambler's Dodge, which will recharge our melee ability when we perform a dodge near enemies. Our melee by default is Snare Bomb, and for our grenades, we recommend either Vortex or Magnetic Grenades, whichever you prefer. What's important is you secure kills with it. As for our aspects, we chose Vanishing Step, which makes us invisible when we dodge, and Stylus Executioner, which states that defeating a weakened, suppressed, or volatile target grants invisibility and true sight. Now, after performing a Stylus Execution, your next melee attack, while invisible, weakens targets. Now, for our fragments, we have Echo of Undermining, where your Void Grenades weakens targets. Echo of Starvation, where picking up an orb grants us Devour. Echo of Persistence, which allows our void buffs applied to you to have increased duration. And Echo of Harvest, defeating weakened targets with precision final blows will create an orb of power. Now for our exotic armor, we are of course going to be running Gyrfalcon's Hauberk, which by the way just recently got reworked. It is so good inside of PvE. It now grants volatile rounds when emerging from invisibility, and while invisible, if you perform a finisher on a combatant, you gain 6 seconds of 35% damage increase, as well as extra class ability regeneration, a reserve overshield for you and your allies that can be deployed when you use your class ability. Now weapons. Our weapon of choice this time is actually not an exotic. I know most people would think Collective Obligation. We recently tried it with Collective Obligation and it's very, very good. We're actually going to be choosing the Ritual Pulse Rifle Veles-x. This is the ritual weapon for this season, meaning everyone can get it. It has a static roll, literally no RNG, just simply play Crucible Strikes or Gambit, and once you hit rank 16, you'll be able to claim this roll, which comes with Repulsor Brace and Golden Tricorn, which is perfect for this build, guys. Not only that, we have artifact mods aiding pulse rifles this season. We've seen several people discount this gun already because it's not that great inside of PvP, but inside of PvE, guys, when paired with Gyrfalcon, it is a monster. Now for exotic weapons to pair with Veles, we actually chose Witherhoard here. Even though it actually got nerfed this past season, where the take and pull doesn't last as long, it can still weaken champions with the Weaken Clear mod. It also stuns them with Unstoppable Grenade, and of course, it's still nice for its damage over time. Now for our mods, you'll need Void Boots, specifically with this build, and 2 other Void pieces of armor. Everything else can be any affinity you like. For our helmet, we have Harmonic Siphon, where rapid weapon final blows with damage matching your subclass type creates an orb of power. Grenade Launcher Ammo Finder, which increases your chance of finding grenade launcher ammo. And Reaping Wellmaker, where after activating your class ability, your next weapon final blow spawns a Void Elemental Well. Now for our Gauntlet, we have Anti-Barrier Pulse Rifle, and of course Unstoppable Grenade Launcher to stun champions, as well as Well of Utility, where picking up a Void Elemental Well will grant you additional class ability energy. For our chest piece, we have Font of Might, where picking up an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type grants a temporary bonus to weapon damage of that same damage type. We should note though, we didn't recommend any damage resist mods for the chest piece because the seasonal mod Energy Diffusion Substrate appears to be bugged as of now, keeping it from actually granting stacking benefits. So we leave it up to you to choose whatever resist mods you want. Hopefully this will be fixed though very soon, at least before Grandmasters. Now on our boots, we have Grenade Launcher Scavenger, Installation, which reduces our class ability cooldown each time you pick up an orb of power, as well as another Well of Utility mod. Finally, for our class item, we have Solo Operative. Now this is a key artifact mod this season. While you're the only member of your fire team, you deal increased damage to all combatants. Now this is a 15% buff, and it applies to both your weapons, your abilities, and your super. So it's a no-brainer here for solo content. We also have Weaken Clear. When using a grenade launcher, damaging a boss, champion, or brain combatant shield reloads your stow weapons and weakens the combatant. This is a nice 15% debuff. The beautiful thing about it this season is that it only costs 5, which means you can slot in Solo Operative with Weaken Clear. So how does it work? Guys, there's a lot going on here, so we're going to try to explain everything simply so you can get a good idea of the gameplay loop. The main appeal of this build is the infinite feedback loop between volatile rounds provided by Gyrfalcons after leaving your invisibility, and invis provided by Stylus Executioner for killing targets affected by void debuffs. This interaction alone has drawn a ton of people to this exotic, and you can honestly just pop on a void weapon and call it a day. And if you want a very simple, easy way to understand this build, I recommend you just do that. But we wanted to find the most optimum build from this insane interaction to give you the best build possible to take on in-game solo, which means we're about to dive deep into the sandbox. So guys, I hope you're prepared. Our other aspect, Vanishing Step, actually allows us to go invisible before we even enter an engagement. And Echo of Persistence is going to increase that duration of our invisibility. Everything else is centered around debuffing targets and taking advantage of that for increased survivability and damage. We wanted to use Repulsor Brace, which actually states defeating a void debuff target grants an overshield. This perk actually lasts for 8 seconds, but is actually extended to 11 seconds because of Echo of Persistence. Now, Repulsor Brace is estimated to grant about 45 HP, and this doesn't stack with the reserve overshield granted from Gyrfalcons, but using both, we can always have an overshield available. Usually, Repulsor Brace is pretty mediocre, but since almost every target we shoot is going to be debuffed by Volatile Rounds, this is an obvious choice. There aren't many weapons that can roll with Repulsor Brace since it was just introduced in Season 16, but there are some popular contenders out there, including the Unforgiven SMG from the Duality Dungeon, as well as Doom of Chelkis from the King's Fall raid. The weapon that caught our eye this season, which is the most accessible one, is the Veles-x Pulse Rifle. Now, as mentioned earlier, this is the ritual weapon, sold by Zavala, Shaxx, and the Drifter via rank ups. Just get rank 16 and you have access to it. Now, the second perk we chose, of course, on this weapon is Golden Tricorn. Final blows with this weapon grant bonus damage, which is a 15% bonus. But while this buff is active, grenades or melee kills of the same damage type greatly increases its damage and duration to 50%. Now, this is a hell of a buff, guys, and this is exactly why Vortex and even magnetic grenades are so important here. To get that 50%, you need to secure a kill with your grenade. Now, for guaranteed kills, I think magnetic grenades are the easiest because it will kill one target and debuff all the surrounding enemies, weakening them with Echo of Undermining. Vortex is really good too, though, as it not only provides that AoE, but of course it sucks enemies into the grenade, dealing very, very good damage. Now, we can kill those enemies to actually go invisible again because of Gyrfalcons. And with the use of Echo of Harvest to generate orbs of power, when we kill those weakened enemies with precision damage, this combined with Harmonic Siphon allows us to generate orbs very frequently. And because of Echo of Starvation, every time we pick up one of those orbs, we get instant health regeneration and Devour on our Hunter. This also taps into Installation, so we're actually generating our class ability energy at the same time. Now, we actually chose Gambler's Dodge for our class ability, so we can generate our melee by dodging near combatants. Our Smoke Bomb actually serves as another source of weaken. So if we want to generate more orbs or debuff more targets to go invisible again, we have constant uptime. You can also weaken targets with a normal melee while invisible using Stylus Executioner, since all it requires is defeating a void debuff target, which we're already doing. You can even make the argument to swap out Echo of Harvest with Echo of Exchange to feed more into grenade regeneration. But given this build is for in-game, the goal is not to focus too much on close range melees, or else you'll probably just get stomped to death. Now, we also have Reaping Wellmaker, Font of Might, and 2 wells of utilities. So when we dodge, get a weapon kill, and pick up a void elemental well, our void weapon damage is increased by 25%, and we're refunded a quarter of our class ability. Now, the fourth source of weaken we have is from our grenade launcher, the Weaken Clear mod. Now, this only weakens bosses, champions, and combatants with shields, but again, since this is an in-game build, even if we can't weaken a target with our grenade launcher, Witherhoard's damage over time is always a good pick, which is why it makes this loadout. And with a combination of grenade launcher, ammo finder, and scavenger, we won't have to worry about ammo. Witherhoard also supports a playstyle of quick swapping when you need it without taking the main focus away from the pulse rifle. And this is important because Golden Tricorn actually loses its damage buff when you swap weapons. So having a weapon like Witherhoard that does damage over time allows you to swap back to your pulse rifle to secure another kill to reproc Golden Tricorn while Witherhoard is still doing work. Now, that concludes almost every aspect of this build. The last thing to remember is that on top of this, Solo Operative is at work in solo content. This 15% buff to all of our damage guys is so nice. And before you ask, does this stack with all of our other buffs? Why, yes, it does. Thanks to our UI updates, it's also really easy to see all these buffs in their separate categories. Now we just needed to just display more than 4 at a time. Now, I do want to go over the damage numbers here for my number crunchers out there. This is a lot of info, so this section is going to even be more info. But if you're interested in the numbers, let's jump right on in. Before we calculate our total damage increase, we do need to factor in Volatile Rounds. Similar to how Gyrfalcon's function before it was reworked, there is an internal timer after you leave invisibility before Volatile can be applied to a target. Your initial shot fire while invisible will not apply Volatile. However, you need to exit invis by shooting in order to get Volatile Rounds. If you just wait for your invisibility to run out, you won't get it. Now, after testing Volatile on Carl, we found it works very similar to like Jolt. After applying Volatile and dealing approximately 7,000 points of damage, the Void Explosion would detonate, dealing 7,716 damage. Now, you might think the damage dealt would match the detonation damage exactly. Our test actually shows it's just slightly below. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to meet this damage threshold in all cases. If the target dies before you deal enough damage, they just explode anyways. Now, if the explosion occurs occurs and the target is still alive, the target becomes non-volatile, and you need to reapply the debuff for them to become volatile again. That damage threshold we mentioned is the same across multiple weapon types, but the exact number will shift based on the class of enemy you're actually fighting, or the light level scaling of the content. What is important for you to remember is by itself, you're getting approximately a 100% increase in damage when a target is volatile, and that 100% is the explosion. X amount of damage in, X amount of damage out. This doesn't matter so much for rank and file combatants who will more than often just die from explosion on death, but for high health targets, this damage buff is quite helpful. Now this buff also scales with damage bonuses like Solar Operative, so the threshold stays the same at 7k, the damage dealt by the explosion is higher. However, it seems that this buff is capped at 10,204 damage per explosion, at least in our testing. Incorporating the damage buff from Volatile is difficult since the damage is all released at once, but we believe the best way to calculate the total buff is to take the damage threshold, which is 7,000, and the explosion damage, X, and find the ratio between the two. Multiply this by and add it to our damage per shot to find the amount of volatile damage we can credit to each bullet fired from our pulse rifle. Yeah, I know, it's very confusing. Unless you're a math major, just trust us on this one. So to start with the math, we open up with 1,330 damage per bullet on the Veles-x. We combine that with Golden Tricorn times 2, which is a 50% buff, Phantom Might, which is 25% buff, and Solar Operative, which is a 15% buff, and Gyrfalcon's 35% buff, and of course, Weaken, which is a 15% debuff. Our damage per bullet actually goes up to 4,452. Factor in the explosion damage that dealt 10,204 damage later in the burst, we can attribute a 6,500 damage per shot, giving us a total theoretical damage of 10,952 per bullet, which is actually a 723% increase from our base damage per bullet. Fellas, are you aroused yet? Now, I do want to put a huge asterisk here. This is a perfect scenario. The chances of you actually accomplishing this and reaching that max 723%, there's a lot of moving parts, and that's probably not going to happen. The buff only lasts at best about 4 seconds because it relies on the finisher damage buff from Gyrfalcon's, which is 6 seconds total. That finisher eats up that clock, and you can just look at the background footage here. The sequence of abilities and kills you have to accomplish to pull this off is extraordinarily difficult. But to give you a more realistic goal, now that you know the full damage potential of this build, focus on getting Golden Tricorn times 2, Volatile Rounds, and Phantom Might activated all at once with Solar Operative. Then throw in that 15% Weaken for that cherry on top. This is a much more realistic goal that only requires you to dodge, get kills with your weapon, and a melee or grenade. These all combined together will give you 3,298 damage per bullet with a theoretical damage of 8,113 damage when factoring in Volatile, which is still a 510% increase in damage. Of course, damage isn't everything. Even when you don't have all these buffs stacked, this build still clears rooms. The Veles-x allows you to sit back at a reasonable distance and deal plenty of damage without getting into the heat of engagements. And when things get too hot, you can always just go invis. Again, we tested this build in Master Content to see if it was really worth its salt, and even at 5 deltas below, on some of the hardest lost sectors, we still came out on top. I'd still probably recommend farming legend lost sectors if you're still under 1590 light, but later on in the season, if Gyrfalcon's isn't nerfed, this combo makes solo Master Content easier than it's ever been. So again, for the gameplay loop, guys, go invis with your dodge, kill an enemy. This will activate Golden Tricorn, drop a Void Well, proc Volatile. You'll return to invis when an enemy dies, pick up the Void Well to boost your Void Weapon damage, get a kill with your melee or your grenade to get Golden Tricorn times 2, weaken targets with your remaining abilities or even your grenade launcher if it's a boss champion or shielding combatants, kill weakened targets with precision hits to pick up Orbs of Light and activate Devour, keep getting kills to constantly receive an overshield from Repulse or Brace, and perform finishers when you can to get a reserve overshield and that greater damage bonus from Gyrfalcon's. Now some final thoughts on this before we wrap things up. If you need to swap weapons and mods for champions, that's completely fine. The Unforgiven SMG from the Duality Dungeon is fantastic, or even the King's Fall Scout Rifle Doom of Chelchis, which can cover overload champions this season. They are a little bit harder to acquire good rolls for, but if you need it, they're there. The Scout Rifle can also roll with adaptive munitions, so if you have the crafted roll, then you can also make do with Void even if match game is active, and on top of that, you can enhance these perks as well. Now Echo of Explosion can also work really well with this build if you want to swap out Echo of Harvest, and I would actually recommend this if you aren't running solo, or if you're in a more casual playlist, more kabloomies, and less need for survivability. You can also swap out Solar Operative with the Utility Kickstart mod if you're in a fire team for even more uptime on your dodge. Now, the subject of Echo of Harvest, when your super is full, unless you have a heavy with explosive light or a charge of light mod, you won't be able to pick up Orbs of Light if your super is full. So either keep tabs on your tether and use it constantly, or equip one of the latter options. We didn't recommend any heavy weapons in this video. Honestly, use whatever you want or whatever's matching the burn. We had some successes swapping off a Witherhoard and putting on the Prospector when Arc Burn was a modifier, as Prospector got chain reaction this past season and allows us to completely wreck overload champions and take advantage of that weekend clear. Overall, guys, this is is a fantastic build and one of the best builds for solo players this season. I know Bungie says friendship is the end game, and don't get me wrong, I like playing with friends too, but every now and then, I like to just be a one-man army. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, a like is very much appreciated. A lot of work was put into this one, and if you want to see more builds from us, feel free to subscribe, guys, and stick around. We love making build videos. This is one of our favorite things to do inside of Destiny. We'll literally stay up all night long just perfecting a build. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.